Well, everyone, it's time for us to go ahead and talk about the iPad 9th generation and see how this thing holds up in 2022. Now, this thing has actually been out for almost a year, not quite a year yet, but I will definitely tell you this is still a very solid iPad. I think this is the best, budget tier iPad Apple has made in I think a very long amount of time. So if you're in the market, I can definitely tell you, you can't really go wrong with this type of iPad. For $329, this is a very solid machine. And like I said, if you are on an extreme budget, or even if you're not on a budget, if you want to get a decent iPad, you can't really go wrong with this thing. And I will also add, for the last, 10 or 11, however long many months this iPad's been out, there's been nothing but rave reviews of this thing. A lot of people love this thing, but more so than that, I feel like less and less people are talking about, I feel like less and less people have been finding issues with these budget tier iPads. It's mostly with these iPad Airs and with the iPad Pros that people kind of complain more about. With these ones, I haven't really found too many complaints about it. So that's another really good thing. They recycle the design, they recycle the body, so there shouldn't be any technical, problems with the hardware. Can be some software issues here and there. If you want to buy an iPad like this one, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there. You can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of this iPad, this device has that 10.2-inch panel on the front. Now, personally, a lot of people would look at this iPad and kind of tell themselves that, oh, it's an older looking iPad. It's kind of outdated in terms of design because of the home button and everything like that. But as I mentioned before, that's not quite the case. This is still a very up-to-date iPad, at least in my opinion, in terms of design because of that price tag. At $329 or I believe $299 if you're a student, this is a very solid performing iPad from that standpoint in terms of the hardware. Yes, it's not the most up-to-date thing. Yeah, it doesn't have a 120Hz display. It's not super crazy high resolution like the M1 iPad Pros, but it's still a very good panel. You still have True Tone on it, and you do actually have a little bit of a better front-facing camera this time around as well. If you're somebody who kind of understands what the price tag is on this iPad, then I don't think you probably would find too many complaints about it. Yeah, the newer ones and the Pros are better, but this is still a pretty good panel for the price tag. You still have Touch ID on this thing too, which some people actually prefer. We have the Lightning port on the bottom. We have headphone jack as well. Now, this iPad does support Apple Pencil 1, which I think is great, and that's probably better off for a lot of people, but I do prefer Apple Pencil 2. I think that's probably the best thing going for the M1 iPad Pros. Not the best thing, but one of the main features. If you're somebody who plans on using an Apple Pencil a lot, you may want to swing for even like a used iPad Pro that supports Apple Pencil 2 because that is, just a much better experience than having to plug this thing at the bottom, but I don't think it's a crazy big deal worth updating if you don't really care about it. On the back, aluminum slab, which still looks great, Apple logo in the center, and we have that single camera setup on the top camera as well. Now, I will tell you, in my opinion, the camera setup on this thing is probably one of the more interesting things about this iPad. Now, we have that standard camera on the back. Now, it's an 8 megapixel sensor. I don't think it's probably the best feature set and featureful camera Apple has made. They have, made some improvements with the front camera, which I'll talk about in a second. But if you're in the market, if you're just wanting to have an iPad that you can kind of quickly take photos and videos here and there, but you're not really depending on it too much, then I think this is going to be totally fine. I will say this camera is pretty much in line with an iPhone 6 camera. It's a little bit better than the iPhone 6 because of the chipset inside, but keep that in mind. This is not going to be giving you solid performance in terms of the camera, and it's probably one of the, I wouldn't say the worst aspect of it, but it's probably not the best one. It's kind of more of a con than a pro. But that front-facing camera is where Apple kind of put the biggest update in. They put a 12 megapixel ultra-wide sensor on the front, which is pretty funny because the front camera has higher megapixel count than the back camera. Now, this front camera brings a really cool feature called Centerstage. Now, this in and of itself, I think, is one of the biggest feature sets for this specific device. And if you're somebody who is going to be using the front camera a lot, this camera is this camera is pretty much the best feature on this specific iPad, or one of the best features. The fact that you can go ahead and utilize that Centerstage capability on this iPad is really cool. And for that $329 price tag, I think it's definitely worth, just kind of noting because it's a really good feature of this specific device. So in terms of the iPad in that standpoint, that kind of covers it up in terms of the camera standpoint. Now, in terms of longevity, this is another slight interesting thing about it. So this device has the same chipset as the iPhone 11, which is also one of the cheaper iPhones Apple is selling. So because of that, you kind of have to keep in the back of your head that this iPad isn't really going to last as long as the A15 Bionic that's inside of the iPad mini 6. It's probably also not going to last as long as the M1 iPad that Apple made too. So the iPad Air Air and the M1 iPad Pro. So when you keep those things in the back of your head, you have to remember that this iPad, it's not really going to be lasting as long as those devices, but that doesn't mean this is not a long-lasting iPad. You can still buy this thing next year or probably even the year after, and you will still be getting software support on this device. If I had to kind of guess, I would probably say this thing's going to be lasting probably for the next 3 years in terms of software full OS updates and maybe an extra year of security updates. So maybe like 4 years, who knows? So that's probably something to keep in mind. And in my opinion, I would probably kind of keep that in the back of your head if you're planning on buying this iPad, because it's going to be lasting for quite a bit of time. And personally, I like these types of iPads. I like these ones because they're at a cheaper price tag, and also it's probably one of the more important things to keep in mind as well. So when I think of an iPad like this is something to remember. This iPad is going to be lasting for quite a bit of time, and this actually brings me to the performance side as well. Because this iPad isn't, feature full in so many different areas, I kind of think that the Apple A13 Bionic chip that's inside this iPad does a worthwhile job at utilizing all the resources that it kind of needs to kind of keep this iPad going for all the tasks that you're going to do. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, if you're a student and you're going to be taking notes and you're going to be doing things in that era, I'll just be honest, this is going to be more than enough for you. If you're just taking notes and doing standard things like that, this is going to be more than enough. Now, if you're taking it up a notch even, and if you're going to go ahead and do things possibly like going through and you like heavy video editing, if you're going to go ahead and do some light heavy gaming, I also think this is going to be more than enough for you as well. This is the type of iPad that you can go ahead and buy, and it's going to last you for many, many years. But also, if your use case goes up a little bit and you want to go ahead and do some heavier intensive gaming, or you want to do something along those lines, you have to remember that the chipset inside this iPad was of a flagship of an iPhone just like 2 years ago. So it's really not that outdated. The only issue I can even kind of think of is like maybe if you want to go ahead and do some other things beyond just iPad related tasks, then it may make a little bit more sense to buy a MacBook. But for the iPad realm, in my opinion, you can't really go wrong with it. And I do think it's really still one of the better advantages of this iPad. I mean, the performance is still pretty good in my opinion. So in terms of a performance standpoint, it gets a thumbs up for me too. But another thing to keep in mind is that the battery life of this iPad is also pretty good as well. Personally, I found that these types of iPads do a really good job in the battery life performance, and I think that's another big advantage too. So when it comes down to it, the iPad 9th generation, I think, is still completely worth it for sure. And I do think, is it the best type of performing iPad of all time? No. But for a budget-tier iPad, I think this is the best budget-tier iPad that Apple has ever made. And I think, again, that's probably one of the biggest things to keep in mind. I love this iPad in that standpoint. I don't think, if it's between this thing or an iPad Air 5 or even an iPad mini 6, I would probably recommend buying those iPads instead. But from what I've seen and from everything that I've done, I love this iPad. And honestly, I can't recommend it more. If you have a little bit more money, again, I would recommend going up to the iPad Pros. But this is a very solid iPad as well, and you can't really go wrong with it. So that kind of covers it up. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.